What is a DamDam Stompland? This is actually a pretty neat PS1 import game that I think is like a little confusing up front if you don't know what's happening in it, but it's actually really cool and a really quick pick up and play versus game that I think is a lot of fun. So essentially it's like a arena fighter kind of thing, except for instead of directly damaging your opponent, you're actually stomping on their shadows. So you go around and their shadows moving around, and if you stomp on the shadow, it will basically do damage to them kind of thing. And obviously, you know, as you probably expect, it's harder than it sounds because this game has a very sporadic sun. So there's like at the bottom of the map, there's like a mini map that shows the sun position, and there's letters that show what pattern it's currently moving in. And so it can be like a pattern that slowly moves around the map. It can be a pattern where it kind of like stays somewhat stationary, or it could be a pattern where it moves sporadically in different directions and things like that. So you use this kind of sun's movement as a way to kind of predict not only where your own shadow will be for defensive purposes, but also where your opponent's shadow will be for offensive purposes. So once you actually stomp on an opponent, it has this really like satisfying effect where essentially you or the person you stomped on their shadow will launch into the air, and it's like really good sound, and you kind of float back down slowly, so you can kind of like reposition yourself if you'd like as well. And so a lot of it is like this kind of quick point of interaction between the two players, and then one player kind of coming out on top, which it reminds me a lot of that like the children's game called like Red Hands or Hot Hands or Slapsies or something like that. There's a lot of different names for it where essentially you like try to slap each other's hands. And so like once somebody actually gets you, there's like kind of this really peak moment of just like, kind of thing, like, you got me, or I got you kind of thing. So it's kind of like these fun little like dances that you basically do until you actually, you know, hit it for that one hit. And each character has like three lives during a fight. So essentially you get like 3 chances to beat, or to 3 hits until you defeat your opponent, or vice versa. So it's like a super simple game in a lot of ways, but it's mostly complicated by, you know, the shadow movements and things like that. But there are kind of like risk versus reward elements to this game. Like, for example, when you stomp on the other player, it basically makes you bigger, and for temporarily at least. And, you know, being bigger is good because it makes your stomp bigger, but it also makes your shadow bigger. And so there's a lot of like items in the game that kind of play off this trade-off. Like there's one that makes you mini, so like your shadow is smaller, but your stomp's smaller. You can move around faster. There's like things that will like slow you down or things like that. So like a bunch of different items you can use throughout the game as well. And the players themselves have like different types of stomps they can do. So there's the standard stomp, which doesn't have a lot of delay on it, but then there's also like a diving stomp, where if you miss, then you essentially are stuck on the ground and vulnerable to get hit. And then there's also like a jumping stomp too. So if you jump in the air and then stomp down, there's also a little bit of a delay on when you actually get off there, but obviously it makes it harder for the opponent to predict, you know, where you're going to be approaching from if you're jumping above them and coming down to land on them. Oh, and I guess I lied a little bit at the start of this video too, but like you can also damage somebody by drowning them outside the area. There's like unsafe zones throughout the levels and things like that, where if the player sits in those unsafe zones for too long, it'll essentially get counted as them being stomped on kind of thing. So levels are actually a big part of this too, not only from, you know, how much of the area is like drowning versus what is, you know, land that you're safe to stay on, but also there's a lot of elements of levels that kind of affect your movement, like little like blocks that are like uneven, so when you walk across them, if you're like on a ledge, it will like slow down your movement. Or there's like these low gravity pads, or pads that make you slide more, or pads that make you jump all the time because like a trampoline kind of thing. And then there's also like enemies that are on that map, and the enemies can go around and they can hit you too, and you can also use those enemies as a way to make yourself bigger if you'd like as well, if you prefer to be bigger with a larger shadow kind of thing. And each character also has like their own special moves and things like that. So they have like a one-time use move in a match where they can increase their speed, they can stun an enemy, or they can also push enemies too, which the pushing one is maybe the most strategic because you kind of want to like find a time where a player ends up in the drowning zone and their meter starts filling. If you can push them back out before they can get back to land, then like they're already pretty much guaranteed to drown outside the zone kind of thing. These skills do feel a bit unbalanced though, I will say, like especially on the levels where there's like not a lot of like drowning space, being able to push people back is not really something that's gonna, you know, help you that much. So things like the characters being able to stun each other or have increased movement speed feel like they're just kind of better blanket skills to have versus ones where you push players around and things like that. So it feels a bit unbalanced, but honestly, like for the most part, it really doesn't matter that much. Like this is a competitive game in one way, but it's also like simple enough that like I doubt anyone would ever like try to figure out like what is the meta of DamDam Stompland and like who would be the best character kind of thing. But it's all like wrapped up in a really fun, cute package with a lot of like really fast talking, goofy looking characters, some nightmarish looking fish heads and things like that too. Although I will say if you are looking to machine translate this title, that is probably not going to work out for you because the text in this game is kind of crazy where it's just like shifting around all the time. But you know, when it comes to a gameplay perspective, you know, there's very little need for Japanese knowledge here. And if you want to know the story, I'm gonna guess that like the story is not particularly deep. And there's a couple different like more elaborate scenes where you can kind of tell what's happening, but it's also kind of so goofy with its humor that some of that might be lost on you as somebody who can't understand exactly what's being conveyed kind of thing. As a single player game, I think this game's like mostly like a curiosity more than anything, right? Like an hour or two long. It's still fun to play one player. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but you know, obviously you're not really going to get a ton out of this. I feel like it's just kind of a good, you know, afternoon game and then kind of put it away forever. But multiplayer, I think it's like a really fun game. You could just pop out, you know, whenever you have company over, and you know, if you want to do something for 10 to 20 minutes of fun, DamDam Stompland is super easy to just sit in and play. So, and I think like the reason why that complements that environment as well in general is it's just really easy to learn, and that like kind of peak point in action I think is just really fun to just kind of laugh at with other people.